Yeah, so.
Oh, thanks for sending her back to me. We like her.
I did call her Gigi. She was smart and got lots of energy.
And then I'm doing 3 more days.
We feel very fortunate to have her. Pardon my interruption.
No, so, yeah.
I'm hoping. If everything moves
According to
plan.
coming from Bucknell to a place like this, it's a little bit of a culture shock.
I got the
And
quarter
she says,
tomorrow.
I think our college is larger than the entire Bucknell.
Oh, I think it's like this. I'm sure it is. Yeah, so,
Third
yeah.
text from Liz.
Yeah,
They gave her about
well, we are
20
grateful for
questions,
her.
so 2.5 hours, and then you make
Without a
your
rudder
second
for
list.
several
So
years.
this will be a 48 hour take on test.
Yeah,
And that's the hard one. So,
we will be actually.
last hour, 5 hours. I'm teaching a lot of stuff. I'm teaching a lot of stuff. So, if I don't do well in that time, you'll be fine. You'll be just fine. The thing is that these ones that work out below are all in play for me, but I'm really looking to use like 7 or 8. So I'm thinking like, because I thought Sandy that she just passed.
I was there. Yeah.
She was like,
Say
yeah.
hello.
Years and 30. And they just have 15. I mean, I prepared for all of them. I just for each one, I just did a little.
The worst thing
Like a 2
I don't have any
page,
time to
page.
do anything else. Or at least we'd like to get coffee.
But the ones I know I'm going to use,
Brainstorm.
I'm going to really drill down on this today. I can write all this in on the time. And then I'm going to try to put like 8 to 10 of them in play. I'm not going to use all those 20 guys this time. I don't know the questions, but based on my list. You don't. So you got to have working knowledge of everything. But even if you don't have perfect working knowledge of all of it, you can still kind of massage this and sports the ones you really like.
We're at Vanderbilt University last week looking at how they manage their case studies.
On revisions, I think that's good. Are you
Everything submitted?
I think so. No,
So I think the class that you're in is one thing. Exam book. But it's actually really drill down. Like these ones.
Daniel Tiger is your instrument.
I would be so happy.
Yeah, like both of us are going to be huge in my
anyone else,
So,
Yeah, I don't know.
they're all in the same things. It's textual editing and that's a good one. You take that one, that's a great one. Yeah, I'll just
We have
the header text, I wouldn't use that. First one. Yeah, put it on my list.
So,
Yeah.
The Q text. The Q text is here.
There's just a little weird.
Yes, there was.
Hey, how's it going? Pretty good.
Jenkins and Olmer, I think are both really, crucial.
And so are you on
It's on the list. It's on the list.
how we do
And then this year, I agree, Virginia UMass did hold that 5 years old system. Really good. Lots of the students for CTCs for their internships.
So he does
Those community technology centers that she had at the YWCA. We've got a bunch of different social service agencies for women who are trying to reach out.
like, hey, we're all
I mean, that book, I read that book, and I was just like quoting it.
Spanish speaking, and so then, but Africa's still really still around the world, and workshops, but I'll go leave.
That's what my sister did. She was always 3 when she started talking. But like the first thing she was transferred to state. They're funny. I have never been to the different and it's got.
Oh, you have?
One of the things that we talked about in digital humanities, like medical computing, and how do we do digital humanities with limited resources.
Well, I will be.
And also FLD.
Yeah, I never checked it. It was challenging and smart out. I like this stuff.
They might
I think it's great.
This year, and then I accidentally double booked something else that I can't do.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for the Text and Technology Speaker Series. This is the fourth speaker set that we've had so far this semester. So we're really excited to have some special guests with us today, and I've seen Dr. Taylor at least speak before, and I know it's going to be really great. So it's a bit of an experimental time for us. We've done most of these in the evening, so we're not really sure if the afternoon block is better. So it seems like we have some people here, which is good. We weren't really sure because there's also a visiting candidate for the chair position of English, I think, presenting at the very same time. So always a scheduling conflict. But I'm going to introduce Dr. Kamrath, who's then going to introduce our special guest today. And thank you all so much for being here.
Okay, well, understanding graduate research production in the digital age, open access, electronic dissertations, and public humanities. Oh my. We have 2 speakers here, Laurie Taylor and Sophia Krish, Acord. Sophia is Associate Director of the Center for the Humanities and Public Sphere and lecturer in sociology at the University of Florida. Her research examines the production of knowledge in the arts and humanities, and she has published work in scholarly communication behavior, cultural sociology, the sociology of the arts, museum studies, qualitative research methods, and mobile technologies. Dr. Acord has held research fellowships at the University of California, Berkeley's Center for Studies in Higher Education, Yale University's Center for Cultural Sociology, Rutgers University's Center for Mobile Communication Studies, and École des Mines Center de Sociology et Innovation in Paris?
It is, oh, yes, Paris.
In Paris, okay.
That's fabulous. Why every afternoon?
She's also the founding editor of OA journal Music and Arts in Action. And Laurie Taylor here to my immediate right is the digital scholarship librarian at the George A. Smathers Libraries at the University of Florida. Her work focuses on data, digital curation, digital scholarship, and developing socio-technical supports, that is people, policies, technologies, communities, for scholarly cyber infrastructure. This includes work to develop, sustain, and integrate digital scholarship and data curation across communities, and by fostering an environment of radical collaboration made possible in the digital age, or the age of big data. She works heavily with the Digital Library of the Caribbean, University of Florida Digital Collections, the open source SOVEX-CM software and tools, and UF Research Computing for radical collaboration across fields. She is the technical director for the International Collaborative Digital Library of the Caribbean. Okay, let's welcome you both, and then
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us here. We're really excited both to speak with all of you today and for tomorrow's event with the opening event establishing the Florida Digital Humanities Consortium. And please join us on Saturday at That Camp Florida. We're very excited to be able to attend it, and we're hoping that some of the conversations here today can continue out at That Camp Florida on Saturday.
I will add my excitement because I've been in Florida for 5 years and I've been really inspired by what the Text and Technology program has done here. I recognize many familiar faces from That Camp Florida and That Camp Gainesville, and I've learned a lot from hearing about your projects and also hearing some of the backstories about how you negotiated the doing of these projects within your scholarly disciplines. And as a sociologist, I think it's wonderful to talk to a group of people who realize that scholarship is, of course, a social endeavor as well as a technical endeavor. endeavor, and that those conversations allied together really well. I wonder, before we begin, Mark has been kind enough to give us a lovely introduction. Could we quickly go around the room maybe and hear a bit about who you are, what you're studying, and if there's a particular question you have in this smattering of areas that we've stuck together up there. Should we start maybe?
Sure. I'm Patty Herter, and I provide administrative support to the Text and Technology program.
I'm Amanda Hill. I'm a second-year TNT student, and my focus is in narrative and digital performance.
Dan Powell, third-year TNT student. I teach commercial communication up at Florida State College, Jacksonville, and digital rhetoric and literacy. I don't know what I'm interested in.
Liv Garrison, I'm a librarian over Techniques and a second-year TNT.
I'm Mark Petchmar, first year in the TNT program, and my specialty is, or I guess focus is rather, are English and game studies.
I'm Wendy Cartier. I'm a coordinator for college graduate studies. I work primarily with thesis and dissertation services.
I'm Natalie Bauer. I'm also with College Graduate Studies. I'm assistant director that, along with Wendy, works with theses and dissertations and also with our Pathways to Success workshops program.
I'm Carolyn. I'm a fourth-year TNT student. I teach English comp here, and my focus is on citizen science, science writing, and all that.
Amy Drew. I graduated, excuse me, with my doctorate in August of last year. I work with digital visualization of data, especially of the 19th century Creole community Pensacola.
Congratulations.
I'm Rudy McDaniel. I direct the TNT program, and I'm also an assistant dean in the College of Arts and Humanities, overseeing research and technology. I'm a digital media faculty member, and my research right now is focusing on achievements and digital badges, so I'm spending a lot of time in that area. And I'm particularly interested in hearing about kind of what you've done with electronic dissertations for the arts and humanities, and I think that's something that we're wrestling with as a program, and a lot of students are really interested in that topic, so really excited to hear what you both have to say about that.
I am Natalie Enterberg-Good. I'm from the School of Visual Arts and Design. I'm also in Text and Technology, and I work in cultural heritage, digital storytelling, digital folklore. And I'm really interested in how I can learn more about how to better advise the TNP students in terms of their options when creating dissertations now.
Bruce Jones, I'm in the Department of Philosophy, Center for Humanities and Digital Research, and TNT program. And I work on issues around place and space, digital humanities, Africa, contemporary continental philosophy, other stuff.
That's it, Bruce.
I don't even remember. I'm like a dog. Squirrel!
Mark Camrath, part of the English, a teacher of American literature, and I co-direct the Humanities Center with Bruce, and I'm also involved with the Florida Digital Humanities Consortium.
Well, certainly, I don't know if we're going to have all of the answers you're seeking, but what we're hoping to do today is really bring additional experiences and ideas and data points together so that we can have a discussion together about what electronic dissertations have in store and how we can support students in this brave new world. The general structure for our talk is certainly electronic dissertations are situated in a larger scholarly ecosystem of open access materials and digital scholarship materials that are really being produced in innovative ways in the humanities disciplines. So we thought we'd start out with that broader ecosystem to talk about electronic dissertations in particular in the digital humanities, and then get to the more pragmatics of, okay, well, what can you do to work these things into a successful career as a young scholar? So, does that sound good? All right. Go ahead. You want to come up? Oh! And we're going to be popping up and clicking, so. We think it's fun how many buzzwords there are floating around out there. These are some of our favorite buzzwords that all seem to live together in the giant big tent of things that we should be talking about now. What are some of your favorite buzzwords? I like innovation too. I didn't put that up there, but we talk about innovation.
Can we tell you buzzwords we don't like?
Yes. You don't have to like them because they're good.
I'm very over the word authentic.
Ah, authentic. I like that one. Other buzzwords you hear a lot about? Your entrepreneurship.
You're just describing my last grant. Because they're buzzwords. Let's buzz them.
I think interdisciplinary is a word that gets thrown around a lot and not really thought about deeply in a lot of cases. So that's one that kind of bothers me in certain contexts.
Well, social media bothers me because it's so much more different than what those two words by themselves would be to me.
Yeah, as if other media wasn't social, or we're not social without it, or.
Dot, dot, dot.
Interactive?
Ooh.
Interactive is my touch point for me.
Why is it a touch point?
It means different things, different people, and it's used in a non-nuanced way, and sometimes it's used in ways that just aren't very productive. I don't mind any buzzwords, I just like them to be productive and useful and to translate across. Those are my concerns.
Network, problematic, used as a noun. Imaginary, used as a noun.
There was just a discussion on Facebook about that one.
Yeah, I was the one who posted those.
Your social media.
There's a reason why you're looking.
I had a clicker, by the way, that I'm going to try to hook up so
Oh,
maybe you don't have
thank
to.
you very much.
You don't have to mouse around. It actually works.
Yeah, thank you. Any final buzzwords?
Participatory.
Participatory.
Transmedia. Secondary orality.
Genre. Thank you so much. Well, we like to talk about buzzwords a lot because they're horrible, but they're also incredibly useful because of what they don't contain, right? Very few of these buzzwords actually contain discrete meanings, but what they do contain is the abilities for us to get together around them, for us to use them in grant proposals, for us to throw them towards vaguely ill-defined practices and act as if we know what we're all talking about at the same time, even while they disguise any shared meaning. And so we think that starting with the debunking of the idea of buzzwords is a really important place to begin when we start a conversation about digital scholarship, especially for graduate students.
And all of these terms, we'll be talking about all of these different terms throughout the presentation, and our own personal definitions are a little bit different from the way some of the definitions are used in the field. But these are also opportunities, some of the buzzwords, because they are open, they're not necessarily firmly defined, but they point to productive opportunities for us and what we do for scholarly production and what it means to be a professional.
Right. And really at the end of the day, all of these buzzwords really are just talking about humanities. They're ways that we make knowledge in the humanities, the ways we've always made knowledge in the humanities, and the key questions that we'll continue to ask and answer in the humanities. But it seems like right now we're at a point in our fields where we need to articulate a difference because the conventional ways of doing things and producing knowledge in the humanities have started to maybe not make room for innovating with new tools and opportunities and affordances of digital media. So we just want to be really clear that when we use these terms in our talk today, we're using them in blanket ways, some of which we'll define in particular, and others we won't, but just to articulate a field of practice that's emerging and trying to have a conversation. So we should always work on defining these together. As one of our colleagues likes to say, big ships turn slowly, and by big ships we mean academic disciplines. And so the ability of academic disciplines to adopt and enlarge the big tent of our slide here to accommodate all of these new exciting possibilities in the digital realm is going to take a few years, but we're right in the middle of it, and that's an exciting place to be if you know how to steer your ship. So that's what we'd really like to talk with you all today, steering the ship through these opportunities. A very quick shout out to the Scholarly Communication Project at Berkeley, which was funded by the Mellon Foundation. It's now 4 years old, but we'll cite from it a bit today, mainly because its findings still seem to be pretty robust. It was a big qualitative interview-based study of academic practices in different disciplines, and it explored key conventions, what you need to do for tenure and promotion, what you need to publish in fields, how people collaborate, how they do, or it's really the cases do not engage with the public. And so when we quote various scholars throughout our talk today, you can find the full quotes in this project if you're interested. So, the beginning. The humanities have a lot of really exciting and unique publishing concerns from the get-go, and these are even before the advent of the digital age, if you will. It takes us a long time to be published, much longer than the laboratory sciences, for example. So that's a unique publishing concern in the humanities. We write longer papers. We literally write far more words, or we often have book-based disciplines. And that makes us unique among other academic disciplines. The fact that we write longer contributions to the scholarly record is of course related to how much we can publish, because if a paper-based journal has to be 200 pages or less to have cheap print distribution in the mail, then that means you can only publish 4 articles if they're each 50 pages. And so that starts to really narrow down the number of published pieces that you can publish in our field. So there's fewer publication outlets, period, in the humanities than in some of the sciences and social sciences. Traditionally, although thankfully this is changing in the digital age, we also have many small niche and paradigm fields. If you're the only person that does game studies at your institution, your library might not subscribe to all the journals that you need subscription access to. And so in the digital age, that's very helpful to the humanities because you can begin to gain access to more resources, to network with scholars in other places, etc. And then the final part of the traditional, conventional humanities publication landscape is, of course, the great expense of data in our fields. That if you're an art historian, you need to spend how many hundreds of dollars, thousands even, on obtaining copyright for publishing images and things of this nature. And so these have just been givens in the humanities for a long time, and we're excited to acknowledge these givens, but also to think about how the digital age is helping us to get around some of them.
And some of these changes, so there are new things that are possible, publishing our data, sharing our data archives, sharing full color images online, and different digital repositories, actually working with them. And some of these are, oh, this is great, these are new publishing venues, these are new ways to disseminate my scholarship, but some of these also mean that there are new types of research that are possible. One of my colleagues at UF is publishing an article with 12 full color images, and in the past initially he was told he would be able to, and then he was told no, the journal actually won't allow it, and so he's including the images online to show the different images and allow people to actually interrogate them as part of his argument as a visual anthropologist. And if it was not for the digital age, he would have said, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't pursue this article. It's not possible to publish it without the images. So there are new ways of thinking about our research and our research questions that go along with our research products.
So something we didn't say at the outset is we welcome, please pop in at any time, ask a question, start a conversation, shake your head if you don't agree with something or if you want to move through a slide. We thought we'd do a quick scan of what open access looks like in the humanities now. What are the various ways in which the digital is enabling a more public dissemination of results? I'm seeing some nodding, so why don't we zoom through this a little quicker since we're all pretty familiar with this landscape. I think that it's important to say from the get-go that open access publishing does not only refer to books and articles. It can also refer to a wide array of other materials. One thing that we're really interested is in working papers and preprints and how scholars are making their research available before final archival peer review and publication in the humanities. And this can happen in a lot of ways. This can happen through a formal working paper or preprint server like the SSRN, Social Science Research Network. This can be like our colleague, Larry, in Liberal Arts and Sciences. He just sticks his papers on his personal website as PDFs. This can be through centers, like the Center for Hellenic Studies at Harvard, that has a working paper series, and there's a real honor to being invited to be a part of that, especially as a graduate student. Or it can be, if you're in, I don't know how many of you do it, but in sociology, anytime you present a conference paper, they upload it to allacademic.com, and that's fun and sometimes surprising.
And data sets, too, are being published in open access, so maybe am I jumping ahead?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. That's interesting too. You're not publishing on the data, you're actually publishing the data and then describing it in a way such that other people can find use in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a scholarly product in and of its own right. For sure. Something.
Well, and some of the things that we're looking at, so we have reviews and commentaries are another form, and also online exhibitions. And what does it mean to have data? I mean, some of the questions are, what counts as data? In humanities, we often don't talk about as data. We're like, no, those are my research materials. I don't have data. And so I have many conversations on data curation where I'm like, what stuff do you have in a closet that isn't administrative files? And often it's like, oh, we have all of our student, film theses in this closet on these video sets. That's our data. If you have, student film production and they're on the different, the micro, I'm not gonna remember what the cassettes are called, and they're in the closet, that's your data set. So you have a data archive that's in a closet, and then I'm concerned about the data curation of it. But how do we publish those? How do we share those? And how do we do them in the way that is most productive, protecting the rights of the creators, and then also the intent of the scholarly work. The intent is for broader impacts. The intent is to increase knowledge in the world, increase professionalization, and so all of these other scholarly forms, some which are more traditional with reviews and commentaries.
Let's follow Rudy's and jump ahead to, yes, that's our favorite thing to talk about, right? Because that is something that you wouldn't have shared your data prior. I mean, librarians would have taken great care of it for you, but it certainly wouldn't have been widely available to readers unless they were able to travel to certain remote archives in different parts of the world. But now, curated data sets are a scholarly product in and of their own rights. This is an interview from an historian from the Mellon Project talking about the value of having data published in these kind of fora. And I really like it. It talks about Valley of the Shadows. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this really important original digital humanities piece. And this person is saying, this isn't just nice, this isn't just fun. You're not just being friendly and making your data accessible. You're actually showing that you can build arguments in some really unique ways through the logic process of how you've made your data available to you. So there's making your data available, but there's also presenting an argument in a nonlinear way outside of a traditional narrative form. But if you look a little closer, Ed Ayers did this great project, but then he still wrote a book about it. And he's published and given interviews on this process. And he said, well, I made the Valley of the Shadows. It was a wonderful archival product. It brought all of these great manuscript resources together, but people didn't know how to navigate it necessarily. They didn't know, were they missing a step when they would go and explore over here? Did they miss a part of the archive that they should have seen? We didn't have resources for consuming this product in the same way that we all know how to read a book. And so he found, it was about 8 years after he finished Valley of the Shadows, he wrote a book that brought together the same knowledge of the Valley of the Shadows project, but in a linear form. So again, we kind of get there in fits and starts when we talk about changing scholarly paradigms. Go ahead.
And some of the changes that we're looking at, obviously we have new research portals that we're building together, so new research portals so that we can do our research, but also the whole way that we're doing research, whether it's creating the tools and the portals and the mechanisms and the foundations for us to do the research, or the research production that we're doing and the collaborative products that are coming out of it, we're collaborating. Rather than the idea of the lone scholar, we're toiling away in the office or toiling away in a tower in the library. Collaboration has become a core part of this, and that changes both the way, the process, and the products of research.
Does everyone here know the Rome Reborn project? Does anybody not know about it? Thank you. Does anyone who knows about it would like to share about it with anyone else? Should we jump in? So it was built at the University of Virginia for their IAP, Institute for Advanced Technology and the Humanities, by Bernie Fisher, who's a classicist. And it brings together peer-reviewed models of archaeological sites and digs in ancient Rome. So effectively, you can publish a building that's been scholarly peer-reviewed. But when you put everyone's individual buildings together in a fully reconstructed version of ancient Rome, you don't just have a really cool village to explore, although it is a cool village to explore, I recommend it. But you also have, as this archaeologist user pointed out in an interview, you have an infrastructure on which you can run models. So here we have like Rudy's data sets actually becoming fodder for other scholars to ask and answer new research questions. So you might go into ancient Rome and you might see, I always wondered if I was standing here on the steps of the Pantheon, would I be able to see the Colosseum? And being able to answer that question might tell you something about how a certain Roman official went about the course of their daily life. So here, data set isn't just something that supports an existing piece of scholarship, but it's something that is scholarship and supports new research questions to be asked.
And with modeling, some of the things that you can talk about for simulation modeling when you're doing the different constructions. With Rome Reborn, I remember one presentation on it where someone talked about, and then we learned that this one piece of data that we had already always assumed was true was wrong, because otherwise we had this stairway going right out a window. And so absolutely could not be right. But if we didn't have these people from the different fields all working together to build the model together, we never would have known that. And then from that, we said, oh, well, wait a minute, what we thought about this building was wrong, and then what we thought about these movements was wrong. And so here's how we have to do the research together. So it brings up new questions, new approaches, and it gives us an artifact by which we can have different collaborative translations across fields.
So just as scholars refer to each other's books and writing a lit review, here you have data referring to other data, and so you have a knowledge construction process happening in a place that it really hasn't before. So that's what we like to call the yin of open access. These are pre-archival publication outlets. But then, of course, there's the yang of open access, which maybe we're more familiar with, and that is the traditional peer-reviewed open access literature. But the fact that open access has a yin and a yang is something that we think is important to emphasize and remind ourselves of, that there's a lot in the open access buzzword that we can parse out in more detail. So let's go to the yang.
So these are just some examples of online peer-reviewed journals. So they're very traditional in many regards, the particular journals that are here, and we're very familiar with them. But these are also interesting because several of them, they had to be online journals. That's what made sense for the work that they were doing, and it enabled them to make the arguments that were necessary. So the Image Text Journal is published by the Department of English at the University of Florida, and it's a journal of comic studies. It has to be published in an online form because of the visual images overall that are necessary, and so many of them are color images. They need to be high-res, and as well as videos and interactive graphics. The other thing about it is that image text was created to further the field of comic studies. But you can't really further a field behind a paywall. That doesn't work very effectively. Two of the other journals, the Inter-American Journal of Psychology and African Studies Quarterly, those are area studies journals. How do you have a global conversation if you've got most of the world locked out? When I say that, I'm not making a U.S., non-U.S. Statement. Most of the institutions around the U.S. can't afford to pay for many of the journals that are available because the costs are prohibitive. So the African Studies Quarterly Journal started in the 1990s, before open access was a term. Before the birth of open access, they said, this is what we have to do. With this internet thing, we think it's sticking around. We're gonna go ahead and publish our journal online, and in some cases, we're gonna print and mail copies of it. And that's what they did because the online form gave them the way to disseminate the information and the way to bring together their community. So they're online, they're refereed, they're very traditional in many regards. They're also very traditional in adhering to that sense of scholarly rigor and the importance of communicating scholarship.
And again, I think we're preaching to the choir here, but I think it does merit reminding that open access does not mean not peer-reviewed or low quality, and that's something I think that's useful to regularly speak with our administrators about if they're not already totally conversant in topics. And of course, we are book-based fields in many areas, and so open access often takes a monograph form, and increasingly so in some exciting ways.
And we'll talk about some of the really new, exciting initiatives with open access monographs in a little bit. But one of the things, we have reborn digital works, so books that were published in print originally before digital was really an option. And a lot of these books are becoming reborn as digital and open access because that's the intent. The intent is for them to be available, to communicate, to be accessible, to be part of and to build the field and scholarly communications overall. And so now they're taking that opportunity with the digital. And Sophia has a great term, the director's cut.
Yes. I mean, think about an open access monograph as a director's cut. And this is someone I interviewed, right? I'm a sociologist. I don't know anything. I just interview a lot of people and regurgitate. So someone that I talked to had this great idea that said, really a good open access monograph is a director's cut. It's as if you'd have the feature film, and that would be your cogent, honed argument, but then you'd have all of these wonderful appendices that are available in digital form, all of the things that get cut when you turn your dissertation into a book, like your literature review, and your methodology, and of course your data, and those things don't make it into presses these days because they want nice short things for larger audiences, but a digital monograph can have those things, and in a way that doesn't interfere with the feature film, if you will.
Are there particular presses that are taking a lead on this?
There are a number of presses taking a lead on this, including the University Press of Florida, which is the statewide press for all of Florida. Our shared press. They've been part of a couple of Mellon-funded grants looking at how you publish data along with the monograph, working specifically with archaeology. But they have a number of initiatives where they're pursuing what they're calling enhanced monographs. So how do we publish the book and then publish what else goes with it in these other forms? They also are an internationally recognized leader in open access textbooks with their Armstrong Text Plus initiative. And one of the things we'll mention, I guess we'll mention now, the NEH Open Book grant proposal, which just came out, which is targeted to university presses and other publishers, looking specifically at books that are out of print but still under copyright. The grant program is funding presses to secure rights and permissions to have those books reborn digitally as open access with a Creative Commons license. So what else can you do with it? How do we enhance this? How do you market it? What events are you going to do for it? What scholarly essays? Is it going to be a director's cut? So the University Press of Florida, Meredith Babb, MB at upf.com, totally recommend her as a first contact for it.
So that's something that please.
Oh, sorry.
I think that's something that merits discussing at some point is we're talking about what new things can you do with emerging scholarship now, but we're also talking about doing those same new things with scholarship that's been published 100 years ago. And so hopefully the fact that our traditional forms of publication are beginning to intersect with new forms of publication means that the dichotomy between the conventional and the innovative is really starting to shrink now as we speak. And I think that bears well for this generation of young scholars. A little zoom through, maybe a little. Scholarly societies, of course, are an important part of the open access landscape, and different disciplines have very different values and needs when it comes to open access publications. So one thought leader in the pro-open access movement is, of course, the Modern Language Association, of which I'm sure there are many members here. And this is their statement. They say that we hope that just like we have done with the PMLA, the Proceedings of the Modern Language Association, everyone will find ways to try to be more open access. And of course, different needs for different disciplines. The American Historical Association has exhibited concern over the funding models of open access. We need to make sure that people are compensated for what they do. And so they are raising important questions in this landscape as well. So there's no one-size-fits-all conversation from the Scholarly Society's point of view.
But we're all parts of those conversations, and parts of those conversations are also, when we look at the full spectrum of what our scholarly products are, what our scholarly processes, and with the dissertation being a very seminal, critical first work in that scholarly process, some of the other things are, so what can you do with it later on? How does the dissertation help with your professionalization? And also, what work product can it become? Is it going into a data archive? Is it becoming part of an enhanced monograph? Is it going to be a monograph? And if it's going to be a monograph, the university presses can afford to publish fewer books on the whole. But then there are new initiatives like the Open Library of the Humanities, which is Mellon-funded, which makes me very excited. It's a relatively new initiative. They do have a call out for work committees. I would encourage people to look into it. I was very excited because a couple of years ago, Sophia and I had presented on open access, and at that time I presented on Scope 30. So Scope is for high energy physics. Everyone in higher energy physics got together and they said, our research has to be available for the world. We have to have a sustainable model for it. So the publishers, the libraries, the scholars, we're all going to get together and we're going to figure out our funding model together. And it's multiple millions of dollars. It's a longitudinal plan. That's awesome. And they did it, and their research is now open access for everyone. They've got the setup for it. And I really wanted the humanities to do it. I said, we've got an example, we've got a model. And it's a really expensive, complicated model. Let's do something we can do something that's a a lot easier, that's a lot simpler. And now we're starting to do it. And one of those examples is the Open Library of the Humanities, which is publishing monographs and journals.
Don't you think we should send Laurie to be our ambassador to all these places?
Yeah, we just go back to the AAG concerns for a moment. One of the things I was finding out in reading their statement, one of the concerns was that making the whole dissertation available electronically could make it more difficult for those young scholars to, score that first book contract. How would you respond to that, or how would you advise us to advise the graduate students if they were to be aware of that concern? That's hard.
Can I fix that? I would, wait, yeah, okay, so that's what the AHA said about that. I would advise, well, first of all, I think the AHA, they have incredibly important concerns and they're looking out for the best interests of their scholars. With that said, I think that we need to bring the concerns that we have into dialogue with the data that we have that actually measures these concerns. And we have some pretty conclusive data that says that publishing let me not use that word. I take that word back. Making your dissertation available electronically does not hinder your chances of publishing it. This is a story that a survey that was done in 2011, whose data is still quite current, by the Network Digital Library of Theses and Dissertations, and they found that more than 50% of university presses, when asked this question, said it won't get in the way, and more than 80% of journal editors. In fact, they found in many cases, editors said, if we see that your electronic dissertation has generated a buzz, then we might be more interested in it than we were before. Here is the granularity from that study. There is a pronounced difference between journal editors and press editors when asked this question, would you consider publishing something that's already available as an electronic dissertation? The journal editors all said, yep, come in, you're always welcome here. Note the press editors. Only 9% say you're always welcome, but many say they'll consider it on a case-by-case basis, and many say only if it's substantially different than what you published than what you made available as an electronic dissertation, and the keyword is publishing, because the editors didn't consider an electronic dissertation to be a publication, because they consider a publication as something that's been vastly rewritten, that's
peer review adds value.
Absolutely. Definitely peer reviewed, for sure. And there's this great quote by a musicologist I spoke with who said that when the press wanted them to turn their electronic dissertation into a monograph, they said, well, you'll need to get rid of your methods section and shorten your literature review. And this was someone who was studying classical opera in 17th century Rome. And they said, and you need to add a chapter by Madonna that updates this. And so there's something to be said that a monograph is not the same thing as an electronic dissertation, and the amount of work that goes into it means that it's apples and oranges. With that said, it's a valid concern, and we need to pay attention to that concern because we can't afford to let younger scholars sacrifice themselves at the altar of open access. Bruce, thank you.
So, and I think this is all true, but I think there are some areas of the academy that are more gray areas, and I'm thinking creative areas particularly. If you're writing an MFA, if you're a creative writing program writing an MFA project that's a novel, and you publish that online, there's going to be a whole lot more pushback from, let's say, a trade or a popular publisher for publishing your novel. So it doesn't, you're right, it doesn't, one size doesn't fit all. One of my concerns, I suppose, is, a university policy that would make one size fit all, require all things to be treated the same way, including, let's say, MFA, theses that are novels that effectively rules them out.
That's a great point, and that's an argument that we've had at the University of Florida. And sometimes the argument gets sort of mischaracterized, like, oh, they think they're going to write the next best, biggest bestseller, and it's going to be on Oprah's book club. That's not the point. Often with the MFA theses, and some of them are, books of poetry, and they're not looking to have the biggest commercial splash, but they're looking to have it published by a particular set of small publishers, independent publishers, and maybe they'll only have a print run of 100 volumes, but that's what they'll get a job based on, that's what they'll get tenure based on, that's what they'll get fellowships based on. And those decisions and those conversations are things that we all have to be actively engaged in. One of the nice things that Matthew Gold has said, many great things on digital humanities, but he said that tenure decisions are always local. Dissertation decisions and discussions on what form it should take and how you should do it and what you should do with it, those are also local discussions. They connect out to the wider community, but how how are you going to balance how much digital you do, how much non-digital you do, how traditional the form of your thesis takes, and whether or not you're going to have it available open access. That's something that needs to be discussed with your committee and with your community at your local institution to make sure that you're successful. I mean, your dissertation is a masterpiece. It shows the mastery of the woodworking, the joints, the finishes. It's proof of your mastery and your ability in the field in the same way that a masterpiece is in carpentry for your different abilities. And you need to make sure that masterpiece meets the needs of your community, that it's understood, and that you can finish it. I mean, that's always a huge concern in humanities. And that's one of the things that we don't want to do. Oh, we hear these new opportunities and they're exciting and they're wonderful. We want to make sure you finish, and we want to make sure that you have many job opportunities at the end. That's always a concern with us.
I mean, certainly where we start to see points of tension on the electronic dissertation conversation is when there are mandates that are universal, right? Where one institution paints with a broad brush, or one scholarly field even paints with a broad brush, and certainly if one department paints with a broad brush, because these granularities can be so specific to individual scholarly projects, et cetera. And I think that also brings a lot of onus on individual graduate students to be conversant in these conversations, to manage their mentors well, and to know what they need to do and where they're heading. And so there's a professionalization of graduate study that I think is a necessary part of this conversation. And I don't think I'm happy about saying that, because I kind of liked the gleeful one being a grad student. I'm just going to read and do things that I love. But unfortunately, I think that junior scholars, like those in the room, I know you are, you're very savvy on these issues, and I think that's important.
Now we flipped around the books.
That's great.
Yeah.
Where should we, more electronic dissertations or strategies?
Yeah, let's flip back a bit.
Thank you for your good question, because that's the crux of it. Is this going to hurt you?
So, we've already covered that.
So I think part of our art, and Laurie thinks about some more things, and we want to make sure we tie into this conversation. The question of is publishing, I keep using that word and I need to stop, is making your research available, is an electronic dissertation going to hurt you? And I think the answer is only if you don't know exactly what you're doing and why from the get-go. And so we think it merits saying a few more things to make sure we know exactly what an electronic dissertation is and why people are making their stuff available in those ways. Yeah, Sophia.
That's good for your picture, but those are more relevant terms. Some of the things, graduate education, public and translational scholarship, and academia's role in society and culture, they're all evolving. So we've got an opening of a new era with the digital age, or the age of big data. And some of these, one of the things that's really helpful about some of these buzzwords, big data, digital age, digital humanities, people understand that, hey, we need to have a conversation about this, and we might not understand all of the things that are going on. So there are new resources that are available, or new opportunities to have resources, to have supports for your data sets, to have supports for your audio, your video recordings, to have new formats be included as your electronic thesis and dissertations, which is a library term, ETDs, electronic theses and dissertations, which they're named as, oh, it's the electronic age. That's another nice nice marker.
Yeah, I mean, why does the electronic dissertation have to just be the yang of your work? Why can't it also be the yin of your work, or one or the other? Like, let's think expansively.
And so some of the considerations are, what are you going to do with it? How is your dissertation going to fit in with your goals as a professional, with professionalization if you're continuing on to write a book, if you're continuing on to be a professor? What are your goals with it, and how are you going to achieve your goals through your dissertation? I'm going to see if the on again. A quote that I like, but I'm just going to get. So one of the conversations has been about proto books at the Modern Language Association, looking at what we advise most of our graduate students to do. And right now across the field and for the Modern Language Association, it's pretty rough. Often our recommendations for what should a dissertation look like. Did anyone have any recommendations for what their dissertation should look like?
That's an interesting question to come with, is what is a dissertation? I think that's shifting. Is it, like you said, is it career focused, or is it to meet degree requirements? Is it to meet something else? Who decides that? Is it in collaboration with libraries, the committee, the field MLA? I mean, there are a lot of different directions you can go with that, and what
a definition is for that work.
So it's specifically the proto book for MLA came out of the what departments told their graduate students that their dissertation should look like. So does anyone have any examples for what they tell? I can tell you, I don't have examples because what we say is it should be a dissertation.
I can tell you at UCF it really varies by discipline. We allow that flexibility at the university level, and sometimes that can be daunting for students. I know we've gotten students approaching us saying, well, what should I have in there? And really, it's up to you. I mean, it's up to your committee and what they think is appropriate, what your department, what they think is appropriate. You know, Patty's very familiar with our film department and what they came up with as sort of a compromise, because the film is the actual work, but they didn't necessarily want to submit the whole film. So in our film department, they basically do a thesis about the film. It's all about the background, all the evidence of the film, all of the research surrounding the film. But they can retain the film. They can do stills. They should put in stills or maybe snippets or pieces, but that way they retain the actual work. So that's sort of an interesting approach. But other departments don't have it as clearly defined, and sometimes students struggle with that. What exactly is a thesis in my field? And maybe they look outward, at other universities or other students and their work. So I'll get off my soapbox.
I will say monograph-based fields of the most highly competitive institutions, a dissertation is quite well defined, and it's a book.
Right.
But as a book, so Modern Language Association, when they did the survey in 2011, they presented on in 2012, the normal guideline should look like a book, right? Basically a book, somewhere between 100 pages and 1,000 pages. That's not really productive in terms of design within constraints. How do we do this? How long should my chapter be? We have students across the country that produce chapters that are 80 pages long. That's not going to be saleable within a book, and it's not readable for the committee. It's incredibly difficult for the students to produce. So how do we have these conversations in a manner that's productive, for the students actually getting through the degree programs, for the faculty and reading them, and for communicating scholarship more broadly? There are really exciting things from the thesis level. We call them projects in lieu of pilots, projects in lieu of thesis, or kilos, where you have your project, but then we kind of need something. So you have, here's your project. That's the important thing that you produce, and here's your paper about your project. That paper can be short, it can be long, but that one's like more normative. We kind of know what to do with it. But then the institutional supports. Now the University of Florida has institutional supports that are very robust for it. So your project comes in, we have the digital repository, we support all of these things together. So you have your analytical essay, you have the parts of your project that you want available. But for a long time, it was pretty difficult. And we had students who, here's my data set. No, that doesn't fit. That doesn't make sense. So no, we're not taking that. Oh no, that's horrible. So yes, we can take that now. But those are some of the supports that we have to have developed, and that takes the community approach as well, with the libraries developing some of it, and then the graduate school or the editorial group. Are they going to peer review? Are they going to editorially review 200 pages of data? And how do they mark that as not being reviewed through the normative processes if that's not going to happen?
So are you seeing an average length, like a master's thesis versus a dissertation, and is that average length changing?
I don't have data on ours, but I could get it, and that's a great suggestion. But across the field, it's really widely varied, and some institutions require the dissertations to be on deposit. Some of them go to ProQuest, some go to the local institutional repository. Some are open access, some are not open access, some are still in print. And so getting data on, some are being cataloged, some are not being cataloged, and so finding the data source on it, that would be another major study.
And certainly, I hear a lot of reference to the field of English here, which is a very wide and exciting, diverse field. Again, other disciplines have different conversations, and I've been putting up history as a counterpoint because there it is pretty tightly codified. It's 6 to 8 chapters. Each of them is going to be between 12 and 18,000 words. It's going to have a sizable bibliography, and if you have appendices, they'll probably be maps. And there you go. And you are expected to be able to refine it within 2 to 3 years of your first job appointment, such that you can get started on your second book project. And so it's really exciting to talk to English, where really, I think the nature of what you all work with opens a new frontier and pushes this conversation. And hopefully you'll help other fields to also embrace those opportunities too, but I'm being videotaped, so I'm be quiet.
I think TNT is actually an interesting test case because we're not just English anymore. We actually have a number of our faculty are digital media, we have philosophers, we have historians, and even within the format of dissertations within TNT, we have widely different methodologies. You know, some students do empirical studies, you know, some students do design-based studies, and so obviously that has a lot of influence on the page length and format and all of the types of things that you're talking about. What are the digital, what's the project portion of this versus the analysis or the critique of the project and so forth. So I think at one time it was easier to sort of say what a dissertation within TNT looked like, and it's becoming more challenging as we sort of become more interdisciplinary.
And you're completely right. My reaction to that is that this innovation is always in this larger context of convention. And so what is the intersection point? And how do we help people who don't understand what's happening here make a bridge between conventions and other institutions and conventional programs? And I think that's an interesting question to think about. Do you want to jump to the innovation, or do you math line?
Okay, so some of the things, we're, give one more example and then we'll talk about some of the questions. But so one example that I really like is MassMind, massmind.org. It's open source software. I like this as an example because it is developed, right now it's a command line interface. The GUI, the graphical user interface, is in development by Aaron Beveridge, who's a PhD student in English at the University of Florida, with his colleague Nicholas Van Horn, who is a PhD student at Ohio State University, and I believe Nick has graduated now. I should know that. But they began creating MassMind in 2013 because they were interested in how do different ideas circulate on social media, and how do ideas move along, and how do they change with greater attention as you hit different thresholds for what does it mean to actually go viral, or what does it mean to trend? How do these ideas circulate, and what are the changes that happen through their circulation? And looking at it, they couldn't do that research because they didn't have access to like the Twitter data archive or data archive from Facebook or Wikipedia or other sites to look at changes over time, because you have to pay for those archives. Or you can develop your own tool to pull those archives on, to pull the different feeds to archive it, to build your own archive. But then you also need to know how to analyze it, how to text parse it, how to data mine it, and what all can you do with that data archive once you've assembled it. And so they developed MassMind specifically for their needs, for their research, which are also research needs that other people have. And in doing the process of assembling MassMind, so that's one of their research products, is the software development, that it enables the collection of their other research products. And so we're looking at dissertations including the software, the archives that are developed through the software, and then the analysis of it, the interpretation of it, and all of the other different forms and file formats that can go along with this.
I'll catch up.
And so one of the interesting examples that's using MassMind is another graduate student at UF, Mary Roca, in children's literature, who's studying Mattel's products and interactive materials and how they offer narrative content and directions for play, while also functioning as scripts for consumers using social media. So she's using MassMind to collect social media on Mattel's Monster High and Ever After High to study how Mattel promotes and manages its products and stories. That's a really interesting, this research is now made possible thanks to the software being available. But the research questions, so the software is available, but our community of practice has also changed through the work that Aaron and Nicholas are doing. So they've created new software in it, but they've also said these are some of the research questions we can pursue, and we can pursue them together. And so that changes what it means to do research, how we're doing research, and her, by doing her research with the software, is then another user tester to inform the software development that then furthers their research as well. So then they become part of a collaborative team in the process. So again, masterpieces, we're showing mastery. How do we do that with the dissertation, and what does it mean? What are we showing mastery for? Often the assumptions were we're showing mastery in order to have a tenure track teaching job, and so the idea is always the book. You have the proto book, and there's a trajectory where that becomes the book itself. But what does it mean when we're looking at professionalization overall? So one of the challenges in understanding graduate research production in the digital age is what counts. What counts for you? So what counts as the work product with the dissertation? And how do we look at it in terms of not just a fixed product, but also what it means in terms of public scholarship? What does it mean for broader impacts? With every NSF grant, National Science Foundation grant, they look at what are the broader impacts. That's one of the grant criteria. And so how do we look at broader impacts from our work as public scholarship? What does it mean when you create the work and you're growing your field as part of doing it? So it's not just that you're saying, I'm going to produce a book and I'm going to become a professor. This existing, often seemingly very closed process. But what else does this do? How does my work on my dissertation benefit me as a professional? How in the process of doing it am I sharing my data? Am I building my professional reputation? Am I building my opportunities? Am I building my community out among me and with others in terms of public scholarship? And so what counts for your work and your goals? Those are some of the questions in asking on your dissertation. And so so we have a number of questions on what does your dissertation do for you and how does it do it? Developing your reputation, your professionalization. One of the things that I see about digital humanities projects that I would say have failed, and not are failing, but have failed. Sometimes we see digital humanities projects and other scholarly projects that are extraction-based. Oh, we're going to go in and we're going to study X and we're going to take it and then we're going to close it up. And we're not going to have that line of connection going back and forth, that line of communication. One of the reasons why open access always comes up for me with digital humanities, digital scholarship, and one of the reasons I use the terms digital humanities, digital scholarship, and public scholarship interchangeably, how do we share it with the public? How do we have successful examples where we're sharing back our results? We're not just taking results from a particular thing. And we're having everyone engaged in the conversation together. We're building our communities. We're building understanding of the value of academia, the importance of academia, the role of academia, and of intellectual life, the life of the mind. How are we doing that as a community together through our individual work, which also benefits us as individuals and not just promoting community growth. We always want to support the individual as well, but how do we make that part of a virtuous circle where we're all benefiting? And some of that is working on the plan for the dissertation and the approach for it, making considerations for, well, what is this going to do for me? Obviously, it's an exciting topic, I'm interested in it, but how do my approaches build my professional development, build my skills, allow me to showcase what I can do, and build my community along with me?
Can I say something about that? I mean, that's easier said than done, it seems to me, because, if you think about the analogy in other fields, I mean, physicists are not writing their dissertations for a public, they're writing it for a very small group of people. They may also want to engage that public, but that's quite a different project. And, our work is often perceived, I think, as being much closer to our publics, and in some cases it probably is. But it's still, I think, work. And I think there are probably a number of different kinds of solutions to that, but it is another layer of stuff that if done well adds quite a lot more to the process. I mean, I'm a philosopher, and I know when we have our dissertations, we're looking for kind of philosophical rigor and familiarity with literature and all that sort of stuff. So if somebody's writing about ethics, let's say, we may also want to see if they can engage the larger community that ethical question might matter to. But, they're not going to care about the deep literature and all of that. And so, I don't know if you have seen any particularly successful examples of people who have done both, the rigor of the work and also engage the public and not kill themselves doing it because of two different.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and that's so great. I'm so glad that we started with buzzwords. Because when I talk about public engagement, engaging the public, often I mean engaging the possibility of engaging the public. Because we so often talk about crowdsourcing, which I'm always, crowdsourcing, my most hated buzzword. But what does the crowd mean? Far from the madding crowd. I mean, the crowd is just the mass. And how do you shape it, use it? And often if you look at the technological constructs to have really something be crowdsourced, it's far more difficult than if you were just to pay Amazon's Mechanical Turk to do the work. But community sourcing is something that's radically different. So one of the things that we have a huge opportunity, we have so many undergraduates, I mean, University of Central Florida, you have more than the University of Florida, over 50,000 undergraduates. So we have all of these well-trained, well-educated students, life of the mind, habits and ways of thinking, portable knowledge, and once they graduate, so often we cut them off completely. They don't have access to our libraries. They're not really, it's difficult to get into campus, it's difficult to use the libraries, and they don't have access to the databases, and they're really shut out of a lot of the conversations. I'm not saying that they're going to be, thriving discussions necessarily, but we don't have to close off that possibility immediately. So how do we have that be open and possible for the community sourcing and engagement of a specific community, not someone who's completely removed from it. But then how do we do that in a manner that doesn't kill our faculty, that doesn't kill our students, and that doesn't kill our fields in trying to, how do we engage all of them while maintaining all the scholarly rigor? It sounds like, why don't you just do more with less and more with less and more with less? And so one of the approaches that we're taking at the University of Florida is looking at having a digital humanities graduate certificate and a digital humanities studio course, and those are still working their way through the approval process. But it takes a while, we're a bureaucracy, but we're moving along, things are very successful. We keep making progress. But one of the things, the thing that most excited me about the plan for this, and this comes from Elizabeth Dale, who's one of our historians and law professors, she introduced the idea not just as credentialing, like, we have all of these existing courses, how do we have these certificate frameworks so that students have another credential when they go on the job market, but how do we look at having the studio course as changing the way that we're working and making us work together as a community. So the studio course will be team taught by a librarian and by one of our teaching faculty members. And we're going to have different cohorts, and we're going to make sure that we're still, we haven't done it yet, so we're looking at how to do it. But working together as a community to support the process as over time, so using the studio as a capstone, but across the different courses. So how do we have the students meet together, produce work together, share it out together, and with the faculty also having more resources from the librarians who are teaching it and who are supporting the process. We do not have all the answers on it, but we recognize that this is a huge part of the problem. And how do we do it? It's something that we need to do, and so we can only tackle it as a community.
I would offer 3 ways I see it being done. One is blogs. I see great public engagement happening through blogs in a way that doesn't seem to take a lot of time or resources away from dissertating. I see it happening through teaching, through service learning courses that go beyond the notion of service to one of engagement and community partnership, and that's something that students are already doing as part of their teaching assistantships, although we spend way too much time on it because it's good and it's important and we should. And the third way that I see people engaging the publics while also preparing a dissertation for a scholarly field is through collaborating with artists on exhibitions. Those exhibitions could be digital or in person, but artists know how to do these things very well. They're rewarded for public peer review as well as expert peer review, and so I think that we can start some dialogues with them and divide and conquer there. Let's go to the elephant. So if we have 5 more minutes of your time, what we'd like to sum up with is really looking at the digital humanities pioneers who have inspired us, thinking about how they began their publishing careers, bachelor dissertations, etc., and looking at what strategies they used to be successful and to navigate the changing publication landscape at the time. And so I kind of feel like the wet blanket in this conversation a lot because you're all talking about these really exciting digital innovations, and I'm talking about book chapters that are 12,000 words. But I think you need me in a room like this to just try to remind ourselves that if there's a translation point to be made, there's 2 sides of that translation. There's 2 languages being spoken. And so I thought maybe we'd start by really breaking down, well, why have we been book and article dominated field? What is contained in a book and article that seem to be of value, and how might those things that books and articles contain also be located in a different form of knowledge making process? So there's some very pragmatic reasons why we've always liked books and articles. They're easy passports to promotion. It's much easier to count your outputs than your inputs all the time that you put into something. It's a proof of concept. It's a way of formally tracking ideas in a field. Janet Murray talks a lot, Hamlet on the holodeck, talks a lot about their cognitive devices, their containers. There are ways in which we can engage and share ideas in our fields. And certainly their translation points. There are ways in which we tell other people in our field what we've done and help them to understand how it intersects with what they've done, such that we can brick by brick build a wall of a field. Wall's maybe the wrong analogy. A building, a beautiful cathedral in our field together. You know, can you do these things without books and articles? Can you do them with other scholarly products? Absolutely. I hear you all doing it. But let's articulate what the intellectual work is that goes into these scholarly products. And so, Rudy, when you ask this great question, what should an electronic dissertation look like? I don't have an answer, but I might offer to you some of the things that it should contain in the hopes that that might help you to find a vessel for that. So again, more interviews, historians. What is scholarship? What are we supposed to do as scholars? Well, it's not just getting the data. It's my personal relationship to the data. It's an interpretation of the data. It's an argument that I make with the data. The data don't speak for themselves. Two people might go to the same archive and come away with different things. So there's something besides data that we know needs to go into an electronic dissertation. What might that look like? I think that this emphasis, and it's not just data, is something that raises some incorrect stereotypes about the work that goes on in the digital humanities. On our left, we have this column of what it is that scholars do, what they should be rewarded for doing. They should be acknowledged. They should develop closely reasoned arguments, which we are most familiar with in a narrative linear form that takes a book or an article, and it should prove something, or it should validate a hypothesis. And we have these misperceptions that digital genres, or digital scholarly products, or not even digital scholarly products, but just other scholarly products, they might be exhibitions, they might be art pieces, etc., that they don't do these things, that these things are data, or they're just skills, or they provide information or techniques, they're services to scholarship, that they shouldn't stand alone. And I think this is a bias in the field, and I think it's a misperception in the field, but it's something that I think we're forced to work with productively and find ways to translate our work into so that we can talk. So, Laurie, and my research question was, well, what do digital pioneers do when they're faced with this disjuncture of perception? So we see them emphasizing the traditional research question as a way of forming a bridge between the digital project that I'm working on and the field of inquiry that I'm working in. So what is the intellectual work here, says this historian? What does it take to push scholarship forward in this way? Why am I studying this in this way? If you can answer that question in your dissertation, it's going to insert into your field. Of course, there's always like our Valley of the Shadows project in Ed Ayers. Publish your project, publish your peer-reviewed work about that project. Do the two in tandem. I hope that they get to sleep, because that sounds exhausting. Some of our colleagues, digital innovators, they just wait it out, or they'll move to a different institution that's more flexible and accommodates other forms of scholarly products. They'll wait till they have tenure to do this kind of work. They'll get a joint appointment in a place that supports this kind of work, etc. But in any case, they think from the outset about what they're doing, and they think strategically about how that's going to be valued.
And so when we talk about translation rubrics from digital innovators, explain how your work has been demonstrably peer-reviewed. Build your case early on. And building your case early on begins before your dissertation. So as you're looking at what am I doing and why am I doing it and articulating that case, the first group that you're articulating it to, first to yourself and then to your committee members. And part of that, there are frameworks, very helpful frameworks from the digital humanities, from the sciences, from other fields, for how to come to that consensus and that understanding. With project charters, very popular in the digital humanities. Here's a project charter, here's what's going to be expected, here's what's in scope, here's what's out of scope, here's how we're going to do it, and here's what this is going to look like. And the sciences, prenups for scientists. Very popular, very direct. So you're a scientist, you're going to be working in a lab, you're going to be doing research on it. Do you get credit for that research, or are you going to be considered the lab tech and you'll have a nice acknowledgement for, hey, thanks for so-and-so for doing this much work? Or is that going to be your research product? Is that going to be your dissertation? Is that going to be something that you're going to be able to claim? And having a prenup, having a project charter outlines the roles, the responsibilities, the understandings, and it helps you in the process of articulating your work and of documenting your work. I think perhaps the largest portion of my job is in reporting, writing reports, documenting what was done, why it matters, sharing it, and that's led to a very successful number of grants. and number of projects and programs, because if you can document it and communicate it, then you can build the community around it. So then you can have your own supports, and it helps you in understanding how it fits for the translation that you're going to be doing on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely, it's a good life skill, and Laurie and I both have these alt-ac, #alt-ac positions, alternative academic careers, and it's true. I mean, documentation is something that is just a life skill through and through. And documentation is generated by yourself, it's generated in reference to scholarly society positions and products on the issue, that is related to editorial policies, and especially documentation that emphasizes peer review and the nature of peer review that a work has undergone. So, and Hermes is up there because if you don't like this advice, don't shoot the messenger. This just comes from the digital innovators that we've been interviewing. We kind of spoke about the Open Book Project. There are some more allies coming down the way that can assist us in this conversation about documenting digital projects and the nature of peer review and the scope of argument that goes into them. We really like Luminos OA. Thank you, UC Press.
And Knowledge Unleashed. One of the things that's interesting about both of those projects and another Ithaca funded study, which is looking at what does it cost to produce a monograph? What are the costs? What are the business parameters of what it requires to produce a scholarly work product with a monograph? And then understanding what do those costs mean so that we can understand the financial underpinnings of the system and that we can better support it, whether that's through library and consortial agreements like the SCOPE and like the Open Library of the Humanities or other activities. And so if we can better support our scholarly work product, then how do we support also our scholarly work processes?
You probably are all well versed in these resources, but when we speak with graduate students, we advise these places as allies in building your case and building the conversation. Back scholars, of course, go to an NEH summer seminar. We love to have graduate students. Every time we talk to Brett Bobley, he says, we want to see more graduate student applications. And of course, everyone's on Twitter, bless them, fabulous. So, in our conclusion, children's literature. Give a moose a muffin.
I was not familiar with the give a moose a muffin, give a cat a cookie.
Give a mouse a cookie.
I don't know if others are familiar, but this came up in the context of our Director of Research Computing, Eric Dumans, who's a dear colleague, was talking about data support and data curation across campus, and how too often we are talking about the technical obstacle. Oh no, we don't have enough space. Data will overwhelm us. There's too much. And the data's over big. We're doing multiple terabytes or petabytes, but the size is only the first problem. And that's if it is really a problem. In many cases, it isn't. So the real problem is you give a moose a muffin. If you give a moose a muffin, well, next he's going to need jam. And after he has jam, he's going to need a napkin. And after he has a napkin, he's going to need some milk. And so this is the way it can be in a very productive and positive way for digital scholarship, public scholarship, scholarship overall. As you share your scholarship out, it continues to build the community, it builds opportunities, it builds the field, it builds different fields, it builds professionalization, it builds the world around us.
And enables us to take advantage of all the affordances of the technological landscape that are out there. So we hope that we'll keep talking about this conversation now, and of course in 2 days at That Camp Florida. The 5th annual That Camp Florida?
We're up to 5, right?
5. I think it was 5.
Yeah.
So we hope that now we might have some time to hear about, hear how you're thinking about this context at UCF and what the unique opportunities are here. Thank you all.
Okay, so I have a question. This is going to put you on the spot a little bit. So let's go in our, for example, imagine we're in our time machine, and I want to go back and create Pac-Man or say Grand Theft Auto, or to build that. Is that a dissertation in your opinion, or is that going to be contributing towards the construct of a dissertation?
To decide on how it, or the communication of it. So,
I was just going to go through a list of questions to try to answer that question with you. How does what you're talking about advance scholarly work in your field? What has Pac-Man done? What do you think?
I don't know what it's done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that question is problematic because it's too broad, right? I mean, you would have to sort of detail what is the research question you're trying to examine, or what is the body of knowledge you're trying to contribute to, and how does that fit to what our goals and objectives are for the Text and Technology program. I would use Grand Theft Auto necessarily as an example, unless you were looking at maybe race and how race is portrayed in video games, and what are the procedural affordances of how race is represented. I mean, I think there's potential there, but you have to be kind of thoughtful and not just equate all games with sort of. It seems like the way you're phrasing it is it's not quite as serious as these other types of things, and I think it can be very serious, but you have to be pretty thoughtful about how you articulate the problem.
No, I mean, it's in and of itself, the object, the game versus the dissertation as a genre, There's an article published several years ago by Jerome McGann and others in KMLA referring to database as a genre. So it's really a question more about genre and where you draw the lines, I guess, and what a hybrid dissertation might look like.
That's a good question. What graduate program are you going up for a PhD in with this product? With Pac-Man, like in our time machine, what department is our Pac-Man creator in?
It could be in this department here on this campus.
Okay.
Because in computer science, or some of the other fields in media and arts, different productions, it would be an easier case to articulate. Here is the simulation that I produced. Here's the production, and then here's the apparatus that goes along with supporting the production, interpreting the production, making sense of it to answer the scholarly questions and scholarly needs. Some of the sort of simpler games that have been developed in Humanities, Adel & Co. has a board card game on race to help students understand it. It was not part of her dissertation as far as I know, but it is a scholarly work product and it has been understood as such. And she has her students play it as part of them understanding post-colonialism and understanding how they're doing different approaches to literature. So the Pac-Man, the apparatus that goes along with it, but also the field that it's in would be really critical.
So the apparatus would be important along with the product itself.
And the apparatus can be embedded within in many cases. So, I mean, the Valley of the Shadow, writing a book to go along with it to explain it, but in so many websites and guides and other scholarly products, you have an explanation of it. So I can, if this is not a dissertation example, but so one thing.
Editor's notes or.
So this is not a dissertation, but this relates to it. So there's a full tutorial on how to understand how to read Haitian Island Luminous, which is an online website based on the digital archive of resources that are in the Digital Library of the Caribbean. The reason the project came about, Sophia is doing his PhD in history at Florida International University, and he kept needing different books for his dissertation. He could not do his work with the materials that he had locally available. But being at FIU, which is part of the Digital Library of the Caribbean, he asked, hey, I need this book. Can we get it digitized? Is there any way I can get a copy? Is there interlibrary loan? There's no one will loan it to me. What do we do? So the Digital Library of the Caribbean Community Network said, oh, okay, here, Scholar, you need it, but this is part of what we do. We're set up to preserve materials, provide access to them, and to build the scholarly cyber infrastructure, the community, to further Caribbean studies. And so the group contacted different institutions, said, hey, this is a request from a scholar. If there's any way this can be digitized, can we borrow it? We can digitize it. Got many, many, many materials digitized, which was incredible. Adam was thrilled. He was able to do his dissertation. But at the same time, oh my God, all these materials are available. I mean, they've never been available in this way before. This changes the world for what we can do for studies of Haiti. So how do we do this? How do we take it to the next step? And so he did a curated online critical edition. He set up the framing for it where here's all of Haiti's history. Here are the different sections, here are the different core events, different core people for it, and contacted over 170 different scholars to each write under 1,000 words on that different event, the different people involved, and tie it to the primary materials that are available.
And so you can see the entire thing, you can step through it. It's rather, it can be rather linear, or you can skip through it. It's available through search engine optimization. It connects through the materials. But this was his, how do we have a work product that also explains this, that makes sense of it? And he's currently working with the university press for considering, can we publish it as a book? So that's one.
Yeah, I think that's partly what we're wrestling with is these kind of standalone projects, if you will, that are online, born digital, and can explain themselves to what extent versus something perhaps that's a project, but is accompanied by the proper historical, theoretical contextualization and so forth.
Well, that, I mean, sorry, you know, PhD is supposed to be a reflection on, like a reflexive sort of move, but, you know, I guess I would change the examples from Pac-Man and Grand Theft Auto to Fold It.
To pardon?
Fold It, you know, Fold It? So Fold It, most of you probably know what Fold It is, right? Fold It is a game that was produced at the University of Washington by their biochemistry department for folding proteins. And it turns out that folding proteins is not something you can do well by sheer computing power, but gamers are really good at it. And so they turned it into a game. And they found ways of folding proteins that nobody had ever found before. It's been incredibly productive example of citizen science. Now, could you get a PhD for Fold It? And it seems to me, you know, you might want the reflective sort of stuff, but there's also the back end sort of stuff. What did we get out of it? You know, there's an example of a serious game, I suppose, Rudy. A game that in some way gives you something that I could imagine somebody doing a PhD with. What's the mechanism for accomplishing this thing that we couldn't accomplish before, which is high capacity protein folding?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around the you know, whether there are any stable models of the paper part that goes with the digital. You're going to do a digital project. I mean, is there a length? Is there a, you know, the reason I say that is, you know, digital media, our theses are, we don't have a dissertation of theses, but, you know, you design a thing, you prototype a thing, and you evaluate it. So, you know, make an app, and then you study it. Did it work? Did it teach whatever you wanted to teach? And that's kind of what it looks like. So that, you know, that's one way to do things. That's not the only way to do things. So I'm wondering what at the doctoral level the paper looks like, along with the digital product you made is the thing you are studying the making of and whether and how it works. I mean, are there good schools that do this, or?
There are a lot of great examples from schools around the country, and there are a lot of really great conversations. Haystack has had a series of conversations remixing the dissertation, where different people are looking at this. There's a shared Google Doc with people providing examples of here's what I did for my dissertation, here's how I did it.
And videos, that have a series of videos on that too.
And so those are great references. Also, I mean, looking through library archives, whether they're the online ones or actually going through and seeing what a project thesis or project dissertation looks like, or what the different dissertations in the stacks look like when they have, you know, their slides stuck in them and their different film strips, and sometimes you'll have plant specimens of Xerox or other little boxes that go along with it. And the physical form can be productive in people thinking about here's what they've done before. And so much of what we do in scholarly practice is, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do, and here's why this should be acceptable based on, you know, historical traditions, based on past practices, or here's why those prior practices are not sufficient, and here's why I'm innovating. The remixing of this series has been really useful, and just really useful in helping share the conversations, because so often we are doing these things at all of our local institutions. We're just not talking about it, we're not talking about it that way, and that's where the buzzwords come in, and whether or not we like them, they can be very, very productive.
Okay.
I see a lot of examples. No two are the same, which is really interesting to me. Some people will produce a traditional book, well, traditional depending on what field you're in, conventional book like the dissertation goes along with the product, because they have chapters, and every chapter in that dissertation is exploring the application of that project or the use of that project in a different scenario. And these tend to be people who scale more towards being methodologists. So I think of Professor Laurie, assistant professor, hopefully soon to be associate professor Laurie Grease in our English department, who's invented a iconographic tracking method that has a visual analysis component to it and a software component to it. And her book had a couple chapters on that method, her tenure book. But it also then has some chapters on applying that method to different research questions. And that is what her dissertation started as. And so you can go the director's cut and go get her software and get what she's doing, but then she also had the word-based, extensive, reasoned prose to go with it that did talk about the apparatus around it, how it was used, how it was evaluated, the epistemology of the knowledge creation, the nature of the procedural knowledge that she engaged when she made editorial decisions about how the algorithm would work. So there was quite a lot to write about. So that's maybe kind of a standard example, even though it's a one-off. I also see graduate students that maybe what they'll write alongside creating a product will be an article. And in that article is sufficient, the 7,000 to 10,000 or 12,000 word article that will talk about the process of creating the piece of digital scholarship. And then they'll submit that with the piece of digital scholarship. And that'll be the electronic dissertation that goes into the institutional repository. Okay. So it seems to be what people need to demonstrate the apparatus of reflection upon what they need. As if those two are inseparable. And I'm not arguing that they are. I'm not arguing that something needs description, but I'm simply arguing that that description helps to insert it into a trajectory of scholarly communication in a field, which is what we seem to still want a dissertation to do. That's fine. I mean, on a personal note, I guess in the social sciences, we have methodologists, like we have people, and that's what they do, is they invent research methods and they teach research methods. I'm kind of interested in whether that is a useful model in the humanities to think about departmental methodologists. I mean, astrophysicists have instrument builders, and they create very different things that go up for peer review in very different ways. They make instruments. They don't necessarily have to write a lot of articles about the instruments they've made, but they get tenure based on their instruments. I think we have some allies in other disciplines that we might look to for ways that we could write tenure and promotion criteria or dissertation criteria. I'm wondering, what are your allies? Who do you look to when you have these conversations?
You guys.
All right, we need to get some more people in this room.
We'll have
more
allies with the Florida Digital Humanities Council. Where we're all looking at these, and we're looking at the opportunities with the Florida Humanities Council and other groups.
Maybe that's something, yes, that the Florida Digital Humanities Consortium could help with, is this brainstorming of allies and models.
I mean, I guess personally I'm less inclined to need exemplars because I feel like that there's so much diversity that's potentially there. And, you know, when you switch to kind of primarily reflective media like a book to participatory media like a game or simulation, I feel like a strong historical grounding could happen within that simulation if it's designed in that sort of way. And something like that would need maybe less descriptive textual material to accompany that. But on the other hand, if the purpose of the participation were something entirely different that was designed to communicate something different, then it might need a more substantial written component to it. So I feel like there's a lot of diversity there, and if we were to say, well, every digital project has to have 200 pages, it would really dissuade students who could do something really deep in that participatory way from wanting to do that plus a 200-page written document. So I think there's some discussion to be considered in terms of, do we need standards, or could it be more like, here are some examples of things that have been appropriate for this type of work in the past? I don't know.
And this is where Rudy and I will go round and round, because I'll say, well, if you were to do traditional archival research, you'll spend a lot of time, you know, in archives producing a product that is hidden, invisible from the world, but it's still nonetheless valuable in terms of the knowledge. And how do you equate that with what's being built on a table or, you know, put on a server? Where, how do you weigh that effort, that work, that year or two in the archive or out in the field or whatever it is, versus the product that's supposed to reflect the intellectual endeavor? And that's where we struggle, I think, is how to be innovative, yet how do you be, you know, accountable to the larger profession or field as it currently exists in terms of its standards.
One of my answers for that would be, we do it through collaboration, because one of my concerns is precious photocopies where they are copy number 2 that exists in the world. And Leah Rosenberg gets credit for introducing me to precious photocopies, where she brought to me at one point, here, Laurie, you can borrow this to look at it, but it's only the second copy that exists in the world, and I have to travel internationally and have a letter of introduction and a letter of permission to get access to the physical copy of this particular book. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. It's a work of Caribbean literature, so how do people in your field get it? Well, they contact me, and I can send them a copy. She was the source, and it was a precious photocopy that existed in the world. And my response was, well, let's get permissions, let's digitize it, let's put it in the Digital Library of the Caribbean, and let's not have it be a workload on you. And also, I mean, she's worried about losing the photocopy, legitimately worried about the photocopy because, well, I don't know if these people still have their copy of it, and what if something goes wrong with it? And so how do we credit archival research? It's huge. I mean, researchers spend hours upon days, upon weeks, upon months in the archive, and often they used to, you take notes by note card, you have the knitting needle databases that go along with it for how to sort your different notes that go with it, and then you have people doing tapes, so they're looking through documents and they're recording themselves, going over them and what's important on their research practices, and now they're digitizing them, but then all of that work, and they're synthesizing it in the published research, but what about that data set, that wealth, that wonderful data set, and how do we support that, and how do we, as methodologists, also understand that these methods are in place so that other people from other fields can collaborate with them to provide the supporting infrastructure. I think it's a huge and interesting, exciting area, and it's really difficult because anyone who's done archival research also knows, I mean, sometimes the archivist doesn't want to let you in, sometimes they'll say that they're closed when they're not. Sometimes you can use these materials, but you can't really use them for these things. These are only permissions you have. There are a lot of necessary, sometimes unnecessary, but sometimes necessary limitations to what can be done. But if we collaborate together, then how can we do it better? I'm always a cheerleader, and I'm always very optimistic.
In the field of history, we've been going round and round, of course, over the how do you incorporate public history into academia. And we don't have a final answer on this, but what did happen in that field is that the three largest professional organizations, the OAH, the AHA, and the NCPH, put together a committee made up of senior scholars from those different organizations. And they came up with a joint statement to the effect that the profession of history recognizes these various kinds of contributions to history. It didn't go step by step. This is acceptable and that's not, or you have to do it this way but not that way. But it's a general kind of statement that says we recognize the field of history is changing and that monographs and articles have been they use the word traditional. I'll use the word traditional way to assess history. But we also recognize exhibits and digital scholarship and collaborative scholarship, because our scholarship has generally been one person doing the scholarship. But we recognize those different things as part of the field. And that doesn't answer all the questions, because when you get in your department, it's what are you going to count? But it does give a kind of umbrella to say, you have a leg to stand on if you're doing this kind of scholarship.
It's really important. I mean, they are real allies. They give scholarships, they give fellowships, they form peer review and editorial boards. Mm-hmm. It's very useful, I think, when our scholarly societies are in on this conversation and facilitate it.
And the Modern Language Association has a broad statement, so to that effect, digital.
I know are you familiar with the national organization Imagining America? It's a consortium of institutions that is developed in furtherance of public engagement for the arts, humanities, and design, with the idea that the arts, humanities, and design fields are uniquely poised to do scholarship in a way that engages communities, that addresses the needs and values of communities, while it's a double hermeneutic. We live in the society we study, and those are inseparable in the arts, humanities, and design. And one of their main initiatives has been a tenure team initiative, and they've articulated very concise tenure guidelines for individuals that are working in publicly engaged ways, and they sent them to provosts around the country, and a lot of them said, well, that's nice. And some read them, and that's lovely, and UF is a member, and we're still working to leverage that here. But it does become a peer community, and that's a community of people who can be engaged as peer reviewers, and there's a peer review publication outlet. So thank you for letting us know, Connie, about these other allies in this area.
I think one of the problems with digital scholarship is who reviews it and where does it get reviewed? Because journals don't always review digital scholarship. And so when you're talking about tenure, or you're talking about even someone doing a dissertation and where are they going to go with this, one of the questions is how are you going to get peer reviewed?
I agree, that's the key question. And I mean, is it easier to ask questions than to give statements about what an electronic dissertation should include? Is it maybe better to say, well, we're not going to tell you what it should include, but we're going to ask you questions that we want to make sure you articulate about it?
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes you see that reviewed under exhibits, so they'll make it really broad and count almost anything as an exhibit.
It's like box number 31. Isn't that on the UF tenure? There's like one box, 33, and they can put anything in here.
Section 33, where everything goes. Yeah. Creative works and exhibits, software you produce, patents, everything else, and everything else has another section, and section 33 is at the end. So some of the things, I mean, this is changing so rapidly that I've been having, I can't keep up with it anymore for different places, venues for reviewing research in the humanities, digital research projects, and having them peer reviewed in ways that count. So the Digital Humanities Quarterly is reviewing digital scholarship, and they have certain parameters that they're asking for the works that you submit when you're being reviewed. So it's a short bit of information that you submit along with the digital work for the review process, and then they're finding reviewers for it. So we're, as part of this is we're building our community of practice, so we're building people who can do the scholarly review for both the scholarly rigor, the traditional excellence, and then also the digital presentation, the technologies, the ways that we're doing it.
On community of practice, can I ask you all a question? I am really awed and honored by the diversity of people that are together in this room today. We have graduate students, we have individuals from the graduate school, we have faculty instructors, we have well-established scholars, we have administrators, we have staff members that are all involved in supporting a community of practice and digital work. How are you talking about working together here to build an infrastructure to support and mentor junior scholars? And I say that coming from a place that's still asking ourselves the same questions. But I'm not sure that, I mean, it's really great you're all in the room together here. That is, to me, half the battle, right?
I think the first line on that is within departments. But, you know, in something like the TNT program, you know, people have their tenure home within a department, but then there may also be affiliated with TNT, and I think as soon as that happens, you know, my sense is that TNT, if asked, would help educate the departments if there was any question about, you know, the value of somebody's work or work that might fall on the edges of discipline and other stuff. We would certainly, I think, go to bat for them if it was. So there's that kind of mentorship, but yeah, I mean, you know, it's also on a kind of specific project basis, I suppose. You know, there have been, right now we've got a bunch of cluster hire things going on here, and so some junior people are brought onto those. Yeah, we're hiring. But yeah, some of those projects, like Mark and Barry Maurer headed up one on data curation, big data, and you know, that's collaborating with the library and with some other groups. A few of us are involved in that. And so that was a good example of a lot of people coming together and hopefully getting some more people in to, you know, work on a kind of big concept thing.
It's going to come down to bodies of peer review, whether it's the MLA or other bodies. I mean, tenure cases I've seen where people put forward their digital products, they've been accompanied by some form of you know, publication, whether digital or print, to explain the project, you know, the digital edition, whatever it is. But peer review, I think, just some stamp somewhere is just really important, whether it's through the MLA or Nines or some other, you know, different agencies or institutions. It just helps committees, I think, understand and look at.
Yeah, and within Text and Technology, I think the guest speaker program is a good example of kind of bringing in external people and hearing what they think. A number of faculty also have working research groups. So, for example, I have a games research group, and we meet every 2 weeks and talk about issues in game studies, and someone presents sort of a rough version of an idea, and I think that sort of setting can be very helpful for mentorship. And the university, of course, has the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning, and our GTAs go to workshops over there, and so there are different sorts of mentoring opportunities depending on whether we're talking about research or teaching. But I think it's always an area that we can do better in, so I would love to hear if you have ideas or suggestions for things that you have observed from your own experiences that have worked well. We'd certainly love to hear those at some point. Maybe not right now, but tomorrow or some other time.
I mean, the separation of research and teaching is something that I'd like to, I'm going to use it as a verb, problematize.
You're just going to storm out.
Verb's fine. Problematic.
I mean, we find even on our campus that it's, well, we're starting to bring the Office of Research together with our educational technology to have a digital humanities conversation, but it was kind of an ed tech driven conversation at first, just because they're the allies were. But then when we got talking with, it was really largely our graduate student instructors who were doing a lot of really innovative digital work in the classrooms, it was research. And so how can we, well, and that's a bigger conversation of pedagogy as research, and but it implies to me that, again, having these different campuses together in a conversation is really useful. So, I mean, you're great questions from the graduate school point of view, because you're juggling multiple disciplines.
And the students are really great at helping each other too, you know. I mean, there's a really active graduate student organization focused just on TNT that Amanda is the president of, and they've been very active and have social outings and, you know, co-present with faculty and have a series where they do that. So, I don't know, Amanda, what's your thought on sort of mentorship and things that you would like to see happen or things that have worked well?
I think that one of the things that I love about this program is that the faculty is really open to working with students, or the majority of faculty are. And I think that because it's interdisciplinary, because we have professors from everywhere, there are many different fields, there's always someone who's going to align or push your scope of research in a new way, which is really exciting and approachable. So I think there's a lot of mentorship. I think there's always ways to show students that is more available. Just because you're going to have those students, especially students who just are coming in and going, okay, I don't know where to go. But I think I'm doing a pretty good job.
I think it's unusual. You know, in Portland State University, you wouldn't have, you know, this collection of folks. That's where I got my master's degree. And I can speak with Patty about many of these issues in the same way I can speak with Dr. McDaniel about them, because she goes to all these same engagements. And so we get a lot of cross-pollination there, but you know, from Dr. Pick's first class that I took, she was orienting us toward publication from the get-go. Dr. Cameron was having us actually digitize documents, and we were learning HTML and Dr. Adam's course from the get-go. So it seems like even you hit the ground running, but they're already starting to push you to various areas and guide you, you know, towards projects and the possibilities of what you can do.
There's a lot of project-based things, and so they're really pushing you to figure out, you know, what can you do with this? How can you use this in other contexts? And then how do you write about that?
There's a lot of application, absolutely.
Here's a thought. I think we're drawn to the humanities, and if we're in the TNT field, we're drawn to the humanities. But we also want that technology. I think some of our projects are getting to the point where the skill set, which we learned in your class, the skill set is so intense. Just how they split off librarians to technology people, you can't do it all. And we finally got smart enough to split it off. Now we're trying to bring it back together. Do you ever see that, although 7 years is not enough to learn your skill set and do what you necessarily want to do for a dissertation, do you ever see the possibility of joint dissertations down there?
Like collaborative, dual authored.
See, I love that idea from digital media, because collaboration is the norm in our field, but I think that's a tough sell. Yeah, and then you always have the documentation problem, and who does what, and who has the more valuable contribution. And some of those silly things that I think are silly, but they're real concerns, you know, and things that have to be figured out. But have we ever had a apply? Has that come up in the graduate school?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's come up in a different field. And that was the main question was, credit. I mean, from just the mechanical part, it's mixing records of individual students. That was the problem we had. I mean, we can work with it, we can make it work, but how do you split? I mean, you have one dissertation. How do you split the record? I mean, from the library side, you guys probably understand that as well.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
That's wonderful to hear that, because the grad school, as the record keeper, as the authority that governs it and that controls the student records, like the registrar, there are certain things where you have to be gatekeepers and there have to be limits, because there has to have that superstructure that then informs the other structures and all the flexibility in our convention breaking elsewhere. But the graduate school, if the graduate school can handle it, then it's a question of how do we document it within our fields and how do we have the other.
Well, that's our question. What do you want to do in your field? What is that result? Is it a dissertation or is it a project? It came up in a different, is it that, where are you going with it? It's only happened once so far. It sort of came as a surprise because we didn't know they were doing it. We don't know if it's going to continue to happen. But it was sort of like, oh, okay, what do we do? We want to be accommodating. We want to support the programs and what you all see as a dissertation or as a thesis. And there may be some way in, at the higher level of, we think it might be this, or, we think it's this, we think it's this, and come to an agreement on it. But we're really about facilitating those conversations. How can we support you in that? And yes, there's going to be some technical limitations possibly, but how can we work around those things?
Can you say what field that was from? And it's fine if you can't, I'm just thinking of lab sciences.
No,
it wasn't.
No. It's something that's sort of still up in the air, so that's why it just happened a couple semesters ago, and the conversation is sort of still ongoing, so.
Well, lab science is a good example of this because you effectively do have multiple people getting their PhDs on the same project. So they're not joint PhDs exactly, but they're in a lab funded by whatever, and
right.
You can have multiple people.
Well, and that comes up, we've had students ask who gets credit for something.
Right.
I did this work with someone else and she used it in her dissertation, now how do I use it in mine? And that's like, and when you said the agreements, that's something where we need to make clear to students is how are you going to work that out ahead of time. Don't wait till the end, who owns the rights to this, is it a co-authored work? Those sorts of questions need to be hashed out way up front. And we had, unfortunately, a student ask me about it at the end. They were like, well, you need to go back to your advisor and maybe work something out there because we can't determine that for you.
I mean, that raises to me some really interesting questions about when we look for allies in other fields or examples of how to do this. If we do look at the collaborative fields, I think of archaeology, I think of the lab sciences in particular, their dissertations are not the things they're going to go and publish, right? Their dissertations are a record of what they've done in that lab, and really they write them up in like the last month before they finish because they don't matter. What matters is the article.
Another trend we're seeing are people writing it in the article style to begin with. And then, in some cases, they're already pre-published and they're reusing it as a dissertation. So that's another trend that's really big that we're seeing a lot.
Increased a lot, just huge. I've only been at the university for 3 years, and just in the time that I've been here, the increase in what I've seen in those numbers, I'd say it's almost doubled.
And I think the question is, where is the original intellectual labor happening, right? So is it in the experiments, right? I often tell my students, science is easy. You don't have one argument. It's called the scientific method. Totally easy. The hard part is doing the damn science, right? For us, on the other hand, we have a million arguments. That's where the hard stuff is. That's where the intellectual labor is. And so figuring out where that intellectual labor is and how to get credit for that, you can end up with scientists saying it's just write the thing out at the end. Not a problem, right? The intellectual labor somewhere else.
Well, that tells you something why the apparatus around the work has always been so important to us because we can't take it for granted that we're all using the same procedural knowledge.
Yes.
Your reference there made me think of something because I've encountered it in editing the quarterly. There are master's programs now where you don't produce a thesis, you produce an article. So is there a trend toward that for dissertations too, that the dissertation should be an article, other than in the sciences. Yeah.
What fields were you seeing that in?
History.
History. Huh.
At UNC Chapel Hill, when you do a thesis, your thesis should be a publishable article.
Oh, yeah.
And they follow up to make sure you're going to
We're
publish.
seeing it more in the engineering,
Mhm.
it's very strong in engineering. I haven't seen it in humanities.
Yeah, we're starting to see, I mean, it seems to really depend on the subfield and the nature of scholarly production in that subfield. So areas of classics, some of our history of criminology students are doing that. Certainly the humanistic social sciences were very journal article minded.
Well, and a lot of the ways people are parsing the dissertation, because dealing with, it should be somewhere between 100 and 1,000 pages, you know, it's overwhelming. So a lot of the responses that people end up saying are, well, approach it as a series of connected journal articles.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then, you know, publish early, publish often. And so if you've got a chapter that's also a journal article, and then get it published, minor changes, and, you know, maybe 2 of your dissertation chapters are published as articles,
Right.
maybe the full thing is published as a book, maybe all are published as articles. You can have a series of articles, and then you can have a project, which now there are venues for getting it peer reviewed. And so there are lots of different options with it, but knowing what you're going to do and how, and for the collaborative stuff, there are increasingly numbers of great resources off the tracks, which was a group that were brought together to talk about how do we give attribution and credit for collaborative scholarship, and also you have a digital archive. I mean, for some of the things, so NINES, the entire art community, for medieval studies, NINES 18th Connect. Okay, so we have an apparatus. We can say your digital project, we have our editorial boards, we can peer review it. We have our technical experts, our subject matter experts, and then we can say you've been peer reviewed in this article and you have your stamp of approval. What happens in 2 years? What happens in 6 years? And so NINES and other groups have been talking about that. And so, well, this implement, so this is now peer reviewed. Well, then how does that filter down to all of the different contributors of it? How do we make sure that we have credit and we have support? And some of that can be from the outset with the prenups for scientists and the project charters, but then making sure that we get that attribution model right. I mean, a lot of this we're backfilling. So, hey, we've created these awesome digital archives. Here's this really important digital scholarship project. But how do these, you know, core people in it actually get credit for the work that they've done? And so we're figuring it out after the fact. And this is something where graduate students can help us think through it as they're thinking through their own work.
I just want to acknowledge quickly a really interesting sub-conversation that happened a moment ago, and I think we moved on quickly, but I'm sorry, my colleague in the pink, Linda, thank you. You talked about the relationship of skills and theory and how that's being articulated and re-articulated in the program, and to me, that relates a lot to what was happening in your discussions over here about, well, what's the form? Is the product enough? Do we need the reflection on the product? The product, of course, has its own reflection within it. Does it need to be articulated separately? I think it's really nice that you're tying these conversations together, because certainly what we expect from graduate students in a dissertation should be what we're asking of them in the classroom, and I don't know that that's always the case. So it's just a pleasure to hear you all connecting the dots so nicely here, even if none of us are entirely sure where we're going. At least we've got everything in the bag that we need to get there.
Just to return briefly to the collaborative dissertation idea, I mean, I think one of the challenges we have, because we're so diverse, is that a student will do a digital project and then evaluate it, but they're not really trained in evaluation in the deep sense that maybe a human factor psychologist might be, you know? So how cool would it be to have some sort of collaborative project even between colleges, you know, where a student's evaluation component is their dissertation, and the design critique is a T&T student's component, and some other discipline, you know? So that it's all the same project, but different perspectives and different sort of reasons for doing that collaboration. That's what's exciting about it to me, you know, because otherwise you're kind of doing it, but you're not really doing it because you don't know how to do it in the same way that someone who's been trained for their whole graduate career to learn how to do that thing could do, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I see a lot, I mean, the opportunities with collaborative dissertations as what I see when I'm assembling a project team for a grant. Okay, so what are the roles that we need? What are the different expertise? And we're picking radically different people. And we're picking a couple of translators or cultural travelers. And so I'm one of those, I'm a librarian. Librarians have traditionally been treated as cultural travelers. So you're in the libraries, which are a neutral space, and then you can go out into the field. You're a subject specialist librarian. Oh, you're also a functional specialist. Oh, you may liaise with several departments, and so and they're treated as you have credential, you're accepted within those fields, and then you can also pull people back to the neutral space on campus of the libraries. And so and you need to have some of those translators. We also call them glue people or hinge people.
Super connectors.
Yeah. And so we help the team move along, and we do some of the things, the facilitation of the meetings, and also just helping, the different groups translate and connect across each other. But when you're assembling a project team for a grant, okay, well, who's going to do these different things? What expertise are they bringing to it? And we often bring in assessment people like Sophia, we draw on frequently for grants because we're not assessment experts. And so some of those practices, we need to have them. And we all fill different parts of the grant project. We have distinct roles, and it's all of our voices together that really make the project succeed.
Quick question on assessment. Do the digital scholarship people talk to the public scholarship people about assessment?
Well, we're kind of new with the public history component, so we haven't, I don't know if we've been to that. I guess you would be the closest maybe with your work. So a little bit, but we haven't really had a critical mass of students who have done work in that area yet, so we're still kind of figuring it out. Yes, is that fair to say?
Lee Marson and I would be the two that have it most recently.
Imagining America, the organization I mentioned earlier, published last week the results of their collaboratory on assessment, and they're really rich. And the one thing that they're very good at describing is how you assess a project from multiple angles, multiple stakeholders. So I personally would like to talk more between the public and the digital, since the public is the digital, is scholarship. And I do tell my graduate students in the humanities that methods aren't owned by the social sciences. We just happen to get trained in them out of a historical accident. We don't own research methods. We don't own evaluation methods. So I empower anyone to seek training in those areas.
Well, we're right at 4 o'clock, so thank you so much to both of you for sharing your knowledge. And that camp this weekend will be a great opportunity for further conversations and new ideas. So how about another round of applause? Thank you all.